Hello and welcome friends to this last unit in the Indian economy course in the fourth semester. In this particular unit we have to basically talk about the industrial policy, understand what basically industrial policy is and what are the various constituents of industrial policy, and then we have to basically discuss the industrial policy 1956 and the latest one 3 decades back, industrial policy 1991. Apart from that, we'll also have a brief look at industrial sickness. So we are starting our discussion on industrial policy now. What is basically industrial policy? We'll understand. Basically, industrial policy is a characteristic of mixed economy. Industrial policy basically comes up with rules and regulations to regulate the industries in a particular country, which means there is an element of government trying to regulate the business fair. Now this is an element of, you would understand that this basically an element wherein the government tries to regulate the business activities is an element of a command and control economy. On the other hand, since there would be many private industries in the economy also, there is also an element of a capitalist kind of economy, which means basically industrial policies would be mostly seen in those economies which are a mix of a centrally planned command and control and the capitalist kind of economic system. In other words, they would be mostly seen in the mixed economies like India, and India has an industrial policy. We have had 3 to 4, we have had different industrial policies in different years after our independence. And we have understood now that industrial policy basically would be seen in a mixed economy, in a economic system which has both elements of capitalist as well as command and control economy. Basically, industrial policy outlines the industrial strategy of a country. What is the strategy of a country? What kind of products are to be produced? What kind of products are not to be produced? What kind of products would be produced by the public sector? What would be the products reserved for production in small scale industries or cottage industries, and what will be those spheres of activities, economic activities, wherein only and only private sector role would be allowed. So these kind of strategies, they are outlined by the industrial policy. This is basically a compendium, a collection of broad policy governing all the industries. Please understand, they are not specific policies which are mentioned in an industrial policy document. They are basically broad policies which basically provide some kind of a guideline for more specific policy making. So they might say that we would try to, I'm just giving an example, industrial policy might declare that the country would slowly try to increase its exports. Now this is a general broad policy. The specific provisions would then be formulated by the ministries and the specific departments. So basically industrial policy is only a broad policy document. It is not dealing with specifics. It gives basically broad guidelines as to what the government intends to do, how the government intends to bring about a transformation of the economic system. So this is just a broad policy guideline. It also outlines the promotional and developmental measures for industrial sector growth. What would the government be doing to promote and develop the industrial sector? This is also outlined in industrial policy. Please understand that the industrial policy is formulated by the union government. Within the union government, that is the central government, the ministry which is in charge of formulating the industrial policy is the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. I hope you know that. I hope you know who the Minister of Commerce and Industry is in the current dispensation at the central level, or in the current government in the center. You should know this, and you might expect this kind of a question in the quizzes that we'll have. Then within the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, we have got a particular department. Earlier the department was called the DIPP. Well, the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion. However, now there has been a slight change in the nomenclature, and nomenclature now is Department for Promotion of Industry and International Trade, and this change has taken place only a few months ago. And now the department, which earlier was known as the DIPP, Department of Industrial Policy and Provision and Industrial Policy and Promotion, now is known as the Department for Promotion of Industry and International Trade, DPIIT. This change of nomenclature also signifies the change in responsibilities, a slight shift in the responsibilities. Now, this particular department also has to take care of the internal trade, basically the retail trade inside the country. So they also come up with policies regarding the retail trade within the country. Then, as I said, we have had a number of industrial policies since independence. We have the first industrial policy that we formulated was in the year 1948. Then there was a successor of this policy in the year 1956. Then in 1977 there was another policy which was brought out by the then government. Then we had another policy within 3 years of this around 1980, and then the last in the lead in this particular lot, last but not the least, is in 1991 industrial policy. Now you would wonder as to why this difference in time gaps. The difference between the first two industrial policies is just 8 years. That between the next two is almost 21 years. Then between these and these is just 3 years. So there is a reason behind that. See, 1948 we had just gained our freedom and we were new to this kind of experience, was new to us, and so we came up with an industrial policy. But very soon we realized that we will have to further make some changes in the industrial policies. We have to probably come together with major revisions and major modifications, and that is why 1956 industrial policy came up. And then it continued till 1977. The reason why in 1977 we had another version of the industrial policy, the third version of the industrial policy, was there was a change in the government at the center. Till then it was only the Congress government which had ruled the country, but then this was the first time when a non-Congress government was ruling at the center, and this was the time when Mr. Morarji Desai was the Prime Minister, and this was the Janata Party-led government. And this had a very different philosophy regarding the development of a country, and their philosophy differed a lot from the philosophies of the earlier Congress governments, and that is why they came out with the 1977 industrial policy. Again, however, in 1980, the government, actually the Morarji government and then the Charan Singh government, it fell and there were elections, and then in 1980 another new government was formed within 3 years because of the midterm elections. And this time again, this new government which was formed was led by the Congress, and Mrs. Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister at that point of time. And they felt that the 1977 industrial policy is a reversal of whatever they were trying to do since 1948. And that is why they found it very important, very necessary to again come up with an industrial policy and to relegate 1977 industrial policy to history. So that was the reason why in 1980 there was another industrial policy which was unveiled. As far as 1991 is concerned, you would understand, you would get to know that 1991 industrial policy, the reason behind was not because of any change in the philosophy of the government, not because of any change in the governments at the center, though these changes were also taking place, but basically because of the BOP crisis which we are facing. In fact, we had started facing the BOP crisis right since 1990 and all through 1990 and 91 we faced these BOP crises. And when we went to the IMF for assistance, I hope you remember what you have discussed in international business, that you can go to IMF for assistance whenever there is a BOP crisis. So when we did that, they asked us to open up our economy, to bring about wholesale changes in our economy. And this was stated as a condition if we wanted to access the funds provided by them. So in case we needed the funds, we had to abide by the conditionalities that they were attaching with the assistance that they were providing to us, because of which the government of the day at that point of time, Mr. P.V. Narasimha Rao was the Prime Minister, and Dr. Manmohan Singh, who later went on to become the Prime Minister of India in 2004. So he was the Finance Minister at that point of time, and the Prime Minister Finance Minister duo, they decided that it is the time for a new industrial policy to be unveiled, because so many things had to be changed because of the conditionalities attached by IMF, and that was why in 1991 an altogether new industrial policy was unveiled. And in fact, the industrial policy which was unveiled in 1991 is also known as the new economic policy or the new industrial policy, right? Now let us understand the scope of the industrial policy. Sectors for public and private participation are demarcated in the industrial policy. We'll have a look at IP 1956 and 1991, and we'll understand that one major thing that the industrial policy does, it demarcates the sectors for public and private participation, which means it will specify which all sectors are open for the public sector only, which all sectors are open for the private sector only, which all spheres of economic activity are open for both public as well as private sector. So this demarcation is done through the industrial policy document. Then what would be the policy of the government towards the PSU? As I said, these would be general broad policy guidelines. They would not be specific policies. Like what would be the policy, whether the government would invest more of its money in the public sector, organizations would set up more of PSUs, or government would want to withdraw from these PSUs by selling away its stake to some private firm. Would the government go for sale of majority ownership in the public sector unit to a private player? Then it would be called a privatization strategy. In case the government decides that it would only part with 10% or 5% or at most 20% of shares, and the remaining shares it would hold on to, then this would become disinvestment. And on the other hand, it may so happen that the government decides that okay, we'll set up these many more enterprises, we will further invest more money in some of the PSUs. So there can be so many different strategies. It could be investment, it could be disinvestment, it could be privatization. What do we mean by capitalization? Capitalization means providing capital, shareholder capital to the public sector unit. So whether government is going to provide additional capital to these public sector units or not, that is something that is also outlined in the industrial policy document. What the government plans to do to enhance the efficiency, to improve the efficiency levels in these public sector organizations, this is another thing which is part of the industrial policy document. And how the government plans to go about manpower rationalization. Manpower rationalization means it could be increasing the manpower, it could be terminating some of the employees to reduce the manpower, so that the manpower is according to the quantum of work. The manpower should not be more than the quantum of work. In that case, you will have to naturally go for certain terminations. On the other hand, if manpower is less than the quantum of work which is there, then naturally you will have to recruit more people. So basically, these policy documents, industrial policy documents, also define whether the government is going to go for this kind of manpower rationalization or not. Are they going to keep having more number of people than required for the operations of various business enterprises, more manpower than required, or are they going to do away with this extra baggage or extra manpower that they have, or are they going to recruit at a large scale? So all these things are also part of the industrial policy document. Then what all encouragement incentives would be provided to the small scale industries? That is also part of the industrial document. You know that small scale industries, they play a major role. We have discussed this in Unit 4, and they bring about balanced economic development. They generate a lot of employment also, and they are major contributors to the overall GDP of the country and to our export earnings as well. So naturally there has to be a lot of encouragement given to the SSIs. So how the government plans to go about this kind of encouragement? Would there be any reservation? What do we mean by reservation for SSIs? Reservation means, would some articles be reserved exclusively to be produced only by SSIs? Do you understand this? So if particular article is reserved to be produced only by SSIs, no large scale industries can produce those articles. So naturally, only the small scale industries can sell those articles in the market, can only produce those articles in the market. And why? What is the basic logic behind this? The logic is very simple. See, if the large scale industries and the small scale industries, they start competing with each other. Let's say there is an article which is produced by both SSI and large scale industry. Naturally, the large scale industry has more access to better technology, has more resources. Naturally, they are going to be more efficient. Their output is going to be more quality output. And naturally, when there is a competition between an output by an SSI or a large scale industry, the SSI would lose out. Since we didn't want that, because we know that SSIs play a major role in our economy, we said, okay, we'll reserve some articles to be produced exclusively by the small scale industries. Then what all concessions or subsidies would be given to SSIs so that they can prosper, so that their growth can be stimulated, so that they can expand further, and so that they can provide more impetus to the development of the country, and balanced development of the country, and to job growth. So what all concessions or subsidies would be provided to SSIs? Now again, the policy document would also cover the provisions regarding foreign trade. Are we going to have import quotas? Is the country going to have import quotas? Import quota means quantity of imports set for every importer. So once the import quota is imposed, this would mean that the imports cannot be beyond that quantity. So this is basically the idea behind an import quota, and you would remember that this is basically a non-tariff barrier. We've discussed this in international business, right? So these are import quotas. So is the government planning to have import quotas on certain items? Why? Naturally, because the government wants to probably preserve its foreign exchange reserves, forex reserves. So that is why they are having import quotas. Or probably they want to protect the domestic constituency. For example, there might be import quota for sugar if the production of sugar is already high here in the country. Because if there is no import quota, more of sugar would be imported and the prices of the sugar in the market would decline, and that would be counterproductive for the farmers. Import licensing is another area that the industrial policy deals with, licensing. So is it going to be easy for everybody to obtain license to import various items from foreign countries, or would the license be given based on some qualification, or would the license not be given to particular commodities? For example, alcoholic beverages or tobacco based products, would there be any license given for these kind of trade also? Then import substitution. Would the government want to substitute its import by domestic homegrown production? For example, in fact, import substitution has been one of the cherished policy of Government of India if you look at the first and the second 5-year plan. So basically, import substitution is when you are trying to substitute the import by homegrown products. So you are producing the products domestically and you want them to substitute for the imports. So naturally the imports would get reduced and more of the customer demand would be fulfilled by the items produced domestically. So that is the meaning of import substitution. The main idea again is to preserve foreign exchange and to become self-sufficient. Again, foreign trade may also require some kind of incentives to be given to the exporters. So what all incentives would be given? Because exporters are only going to earn you foreign exchange, and they would also keep your balance of payment account in a healthy condition. So naturally the government would want to promote the exports, but what all measures would be implemented to promote the exporters, to promote export? For example, there could be export subsidies. For example, export duty entitlement scheme. This is there already in India. For example, you can sponsor the export organization to various conferences in foreign countries so that they can go in those conferences and these trade fairs and display their wares and bag orders from the foreign countries. So all these things are covered by industrial policy under the foreign trade head. Then what would be the government policy regarding the foreign investment? Would the foreign investment be allowed or would they not be allowed? If they are going to be allowed, in what all sectors would they be allowed? For example, are they going to be allowed or not allowed in insurance? If they are going to be allowed in insurance, what is the extent of the investment limit by foreign firms? In India as of now it is just 49%, so 51% has to come from some domestic firms, while the remaining 49% can come from outside sources. So whether or not a particular sector will be opened up for investment by foreign firms, foreign entities, number one, if the sector is to be opened up for foreign entities for investment, then what would be the extent of investment? 49%, 74% or 100%? And then what would be the rules and procedures for those foreign investors who want to invest here in India? Would they be getting direct permission? They do not have to go for any kind of permission to any kind of authority, so they get direct permission or automatic route, or would they have to route their request through RBI? Would they have to go and have an interaction with RBI and obtain their permission? So all these rules and procedures will be actually mentioned in the foreign investment segment of the industrial policy. Then naturally the other areas which are taken care of while coming up with an industrial policy document is the labor laws. What all provisions would be made as far as the labor laws are concerned? Would there be a relaxation in labor laws? Only recently government has said that they would be relaxing labor laws for the next few months, so that the industries who have suffered a setback because of the COVID crisis, they may be able to turn black again. Turn black again means turn profitable again. So what would be the changes in the labor laws? Would the worker unions be allowed to strike? Would they be allowed to agitate? Or what all facilities will have to be provided to the workers? What all social security schemes will have to be run for the workers? Would the government want the management and the workers to collaborate with each other, which is basically called joint management? So all these things are basically mentioned in this particular segment within the industrial policy. Then what about the human resource development issue? What about developing the human resources? For example, what the government wants regarding the development of human resource. What do we mean by human resource development here? Please understand. To run industries, you require people with managerial expertise. They would work as managers and they would do the managing part of the job. Then people with technical expertise also required. Let's say, for example, maintenance and production, engineering and R&D. So these are technical people with technical skills. There would be people with other kind of skills as well. How do we develop human resources who have these kind of skills, so that we are not always dependent on foreign nationals for these kind of specialized skills? So how do we plan to develop technical and managerial personnel to man our industries? For example, if you look at the 1956 industrial policy, there was a clear-cut provision which said that the government would incentivize and would promote setting up of more and more education institutes, more and more technical institutes and more managerial development institutes, so that we can have a ready pool from which we can source technical and managerial manpower for the industries which are set up here in India. So this is what is meant by basically human resource development and what government thinks about human resource development. Then the industrial policy also earmarks the tax provisions. What all subsidies would be given? Would there be different taxation for different level of operations? A larger company may have to pay more taxes while a smaller company may have to pay lesser taxes. What if the company is availing various other subsidies? What would be the effective tax rate for them then? So all these things are also part of the industrial policy. And then what all assistance would be provided by government? For example, if you want to set up an industry in a backward area, you would find that you would be allowed to access the backward subsidy which is given away by the government. Backward area subsidy is given to those industries which are set up in backward area, so that there is a balanced regional development, balanced economic development throughout the country. So what is the government policy regarding that? What is government policy regarding electricity supply? Are they going to provide you electricity supply at a subsidized rate, free of cost? So all these assistances, all these subsidies or the grants which the government provides, that is also going to be mentioned in the industrial policy. What would be the government's policy regarding the startups? Earlier, see, this was not part of the industrial policy, but now since last 10-15 years, you see that startups has become a buzzword. So many startups have come and they have been successful in the market. Also, you may take example of Paytm, Ola, Uber. There are so many such startups, or Swiggy, for example. So these startups have come up, and then the provision regarding the encouragement which would be given to these startups, how would they be incentivized, what all differential provisions would be there, because startups require a slightly different regulatory regime. They cannot be made to follow the same provisions which are followed by large scale industries, because they are still at a very they're still not mature, they're at a very young age. So these startups require a slightly different kind of regulatory environment. For example, they may require more flexibility than what is afforded to large scale industries. So what would be the special provisions to incentivize these startups? And startups are important for economy. They generate jobs. Not only that, they contribute to the GDP of the country, and they may also contribute to export earnings. So they also help make life better for general people. Have a look at, for example, Paytm. Because of this, now you can make any monetary transactions within minutes or within seconds. So they are also contributing to improving the standard of living of their customers. So they need to be given special care, and there need to be special provisions for them. So all these special provisions are basically discussed in the industrial policy. And last but not the least is the ease of doing business, and this is again a recent addition to industrial policy. You know that India's ease of doing business ranking was somewhere in around 120, 130 around 4 to 5 years ago, and now it has returned to somewhere around 63, 67. So how to make doing business easier for the various firms in India, because then only foreign firms would want to invest here in India, and then only domestic firms would be incentivized to keep invested here rather than searching for some foreign location for their production plant or service outlet. So how would the government make it easier for the businesses? How would the government, what all would the government do so that doing business in India becomes easier, it becomes less of a risk, it becomes less of a headache? So what are these provisions that the government will make? What are the government plans for making it easier for the businessmen to operate in India? These things are earmarked in the industrial policy. This is fine. So with this we understood, we have talked about the scope of industrial policy, and now we would move on to a discussion on 1956 industrial policy in the next session. Till then, it is expected of you to go through whatever has been taught today, and in case you find some problem, get that problem sorted out either by your friends, or in case you are not able to still sort out your problem, you can always contact me. Thank you very much.